Good afternoon, everyone. I hope this is loud enough, and I hope my voice tends to carry in this speaker as much as the music will. But thank you very much for joining me today. I know the weather outside is not as pretty, however, I hope my music warms you up inside. So if you look at the program today, there's a nice variety, at least in my opinion, of music, ranging from minimalism of Philip Glass to New Age 21st minimalism, or specifically American minimalism, by Ludovico Einaudi, and going on to some classical music by Schubert and Frederic Chopin, and then concluding the program with some music, or specifically hard bop jazz by the one and only Bobby Timmons. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about today's program. And to open it, I will begin it with a piece that I felt was most appropriate by Philip Glass, which is Opening by Philip Glass from the collection of works called Glassworks. In this piece, you'll hear a lot of repetition, and I hope it doesn't sound too redundant, but in the music, Philip Glass is always trying to figure out what's a new way that we can make the same thing sound different in terms of style, dynamic, texture, character, you name it. But more so in that piece, you'll hear a lot of elements of minimalism, and specifically Philip Glass. Philip Glass coined the term minimalism. However, he's not a huge fan of the term. But what is minimalism? It's using the concept, or what is the foundation of music, using melody, harmony, and rhythm to create a piece of music, but in the most minimalist way, no pun intended. Then moving on to the music of Ludovico Einaudi, the piece I'll be performing is Monday by him. And if you saw the movies Nomadland starring Frances McDormand or The Father starring Anthony Hopkins, he scored both of those films. However, the piece that I'll be performing for you today was not used in any of those films, because I believe this piece has its own story in a certain way. And when I'm performing it and you're listening to it in the audience, I want you to kind of imagine and create your own story and narrate it mentally while I'm performing it. Because similar to what the Philip Glass did in his work, you'll hear a lot of repetition in the different themes and stuff like that. But I want you to think about it in a different way. Then moving on, I'll be performing the Impromptu in G flat, Opus 90, number 3 by by Franz Schubert. Vladimir Horowitz, famous European pianist, toured all the way throughout Western Europe, Asia, here in the Americas, and especially here in our home of Chicago, Illinois, down at Symphony Hall on Michigan Avenue. And he would perform this piece quite a lot as an encore. I don't recall if he necessarily put it on the program, but if you went to his concerts many, many years ago, which I was unfortunately not born yet and I couldn't attend, but he would perform this piece as an encore, and you see, he's performing music by Debussy, Rachmaninoff, great. Then you could almost like envision another line under there that says Schubert Impromptu in G flat, Opus 90. Now I'm getting too detailed, but then going on, I'll be performing a huge work from the Romantic era, which is the second piano sonata in B flat minor by Frederic Chopin. This piece is well respected in the Romantic era repertoire for one reason, because Chopin wanted to be innovative in his music. The piano sonata was beginning to die out, and if you recall, like Beethoven, if you're a music fanatic like myself, Beethoven wrote 32 piano sonatas, or similar to like Mozart, he wrote 19. That's a lot. But in the Romantic era, Chopin's contemporaries, such as like Brahms, he only wrote 3 sonatas, Schumann, 3 sonatas, Liszt, 1 sonata, which can be very daunting to many musicians. But I chose to perform this sonata for you today because of how many different elements and layers of character there are, and specifically emotion. In the first movement, you'll think I'm banging on the piano. However, I can assure you I'm not. I take care of the instruments I play on. It's very sorrowful, and it's very bold, and it's quite a statement that Chopin is making in the music. Then going on to the second movement, it's a scherzo, and if you're a musician like myself, you think scherzo, you think, oh, this is going to be playful, nice. It's the exact opposite. It's very deceiving, and it's a very demonic movement. And Chopin's really utilizing the lower register on the piano to create such a dark and almost like a very sad and ominous character within the instrument. The third movement is a very slow march, and then the fourth movement, I think it's like a minute and a half long. It's like as my teacher likes to call it, a wind going through the trees, and I think today's weather in the northern shore of Chicago kind of defines that perfectly. And then to conclude the program, I will perform Moanin by Bobby Timmons, but not to get confused with the Charles Mingus Moanin. Usually when I do perform that piece, I've got like a drummer up here, a bassist in the corner, and a few saxes. However, I'm lucky to have couple musicians up here with me today. So without further ado, I will begin today's program with Opening by Philip Glass. Now we just heard some music of the minimalist era, which was written a long time ago, and Philip Glass, most well known now, he's big in the opera scene, and specifically out in New York City. But now moving on to the music of Ludovico Einaudi. Now, if you remember before, I talked about how he did the scores for Nomadland and The Father with Anthony Hopkins. And I also talked a little bit about the style of his music, how, you have Philip Glass, and I'm sure you could hear how simple and minimalist that piece of music was. But in the Einaudi, you'll hear certain, I want to call them overlapping elements in the music, and how repetitive they are. But Einaudi is always doing something different in terms of like the different voices in the music, and how, if you remember what I was talking about before in terms of like a scenery in the music, and you have an image mentally that you have created for this first theme, and then it comes back a few pages later, and you're like, I remembered that. I'm really like savoring that moment, as I like to call it, but more so hearing how almost different instruments could play it in a certain way. I won't get too professorial or academic with all of you today, but I like to think about, what if this piece wasn't written for piano? What if it was written for like a string quintet or just a string trio in a certain way? It would sound much different. However, when I perform this piece for you now, I want you to think of like a mental movie in your head while I'm performing it, and narrate a story that maybe Ludovico Einaudi could have thought of himself. So without further ado, I will now perform Monday by the one and only Ludovico Einaudi.
Lovely, lovely.
So now we just heard some music that was written a couple of years ago. Now, to do some time traveling today, let's go back to the 17 and 1800s, where Franz Schubert composed his Impromptu number 3 in G flat, Opus 90 number 3. So now, not to get too college-like with all of you, but Schubert wrote 2 sets of impromptus. This is the first set that I'll be performing this impromptu from, which is from the Opus 90, and he wrote this at the earlier time in his life, and then there's an Opus 142, which he wrote sometime later. But something that I love to talk about with Schubert is when he was around my age and throughout his lifetime, of course, he would travel on horseback throughout the mountains, and he would go to taverns, and he would drink wine, and I don't know if they had beer back then, but he would enjoy and indulge in a few glasses of wine, and most importantly, he would play music with his contemporaries or with his friends. He would go up there and he would say, hey, I don't know, they didn't have phones at the time actually, so disregard that, but they would find a time to meet up, and they would say, I just wrote this impromptu, I'm going to play it for you, or you play it for me, tell me what you think about it, or here's this string trio, bring your violin, bring your viola, let's jam a little bit tonight. And we can especially see this today in the 21st century, or most importantly in 2024, Happy New Year, with jam sessions, not just with classical music, but if you're a jazz fanatic like myself, a lot of people do jam sessions, and you get a couple of saxophone players, you get a pianist, you get an upright bass, and everybody gets together and they make music. And I think that's something that's always nice to do, whether you're sitting at home or you're performing on a date like today. So without further ado, I'm now going to perform Schubert's third impromptu in G flat, and then after that piece, I will then perform the Piano Sonata number 2 by Frederic Chopin. Like what I was talking about before regarding how evasive Beethoven's piano sonatas were, he has like the Moonlight Sonata, which I'm sure many of you have heard, whether in the movies or in the TV shows or in live performances, or even Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. But to get back on topic, Beethoven wrote 32 sonatas. And Beethoven is part of the classical era of music, and then sometime later, Chopin was born in 1810, and he's part of the Romantic era, and he's probably regarded and highly respected as one of the most important composers of that time. But Chopin only wrote 3 sonatas, and the one that I'll be performing for you today, it's long, but hang on, buckle up, don't worry, I'll make it interesting. But this is the second sonata from all of them, and this is probably one of the most well-known ones. But in terms of the 3, the first one, not to be biased, it's not that great of a piece. Yes, many musicians out there, they really don't perform it. Sorry, Chopin. But then, he wrote the second sonata and said, we got to bring this back. We got to get our contemporaries to bring back this piano sonata and do something different with the music that, Robert Schumann wasn't doing, or Franz Liszt wasn't doing, or, any one of the other composers from that era. So anyways, I'm going to let the music speak for itself now while I perform Schubert's third impromptu from the Opus 90 set, followed by Chopin's second piano sonata in B flat minor.
Lovely. You're not here to do that.
Get her out of here.
I'm not talking.
Get out of here, please.
I'm not talking. I'm just dancing, okay? I'm not talking.
All right. I know that was a lot. Let's change the vibe in here. Some jazz. Moanin' by Bobby Timmons. Thank you everyone for attending my recital this afternoon. I hope my music warmed you up, even though it is not very warm out there. I hope that this instrument emitted some emotion within you today, and I hope I told a story throughout the music. So thank you again for everyone. And on behalf of 1.5 musicians with me today.